They laughed when they saw his skin, his age, and the old laptop in his hands, as if he had no place among polished interns in glass-walled offices, as if his presence was a mistake someone forgot to fix. No one asked why he never flinched when ignored, or why he typed with the precision of someone who wasn't trying to prove anything. They called him background, burden, outdated. But what they didn't know was that every chuckle, every side comment, every silent dismissal was being noticed, and not just by him. What happens when the man you mock turns out to be the one holding your future in his hands? If this pulled you in, like the video, subscribe for more stories that reveal what happens when judgment meets justice, and comment below what shocked you most, and where in the world are you watching from? The conference room buzzed with the low hum of anticipation, keyboards tapping, coffee stirring, interns murmuring in careful tones of ambition. It was the first day of orientation at Virexon Technologies, a sleek skyscraper nestled in downtown San Jose, the kind of place where ambition dressed in pressed shirts and Stanford labs. A single figure sat slightly apart. He looked older, maybe late 50s, skin dark as obsidian, posture erect but unassuming. He wore a weathered gray blazer and placed an old matte black laptop on the glass table with deliberate care. It was visibly outdated, no logo, no glow, just sturdy hinges and scuffed corners that had clearly seen years of use. Some interns whispered, others chuckled beneath their breath. No one sat next to him. As new arrivals came in, they naturally veered toward the other side of the room, instinctively placing a row of empty chairs between themselves and the man. A woman with thick glasses and an executive clipboard entered briskly, distributing welcome packets. She made eye contact with each intern, smiled, handed them a folder, a company-branded pen, and a lunch voucher. When she reached the dark-skinned man, she paused for less than a second, just enough for him to notice, then turned without handing him anything. The man didn't flinch. He simply folded his hands and looked ahead. It was as though he had seen this routine play out before, in offices that looked just as polished, just as modern, just as cold. The presenter walked in next, a young product manager in a hoodie and jeans, blonde, cheerful, calling everyone to settle down. He clicked through slides filled with buzzwords like innovation, disruption, and synergy. The dark-skinned man listened quietly, occasionally jotting notes in a leather notebook beside his laptop. No one noticed. No one asked who he was. During the first icebreaker activity, the manager divided the interns into small groups and asked them to pitch an imaginary app in 5 minutes. Every group was filled with hushed energy and frantic typing. Except one. The man remained unchosen. The manager glanced at him, hesitated, then moved on without acknowledgement. A few people shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. As lunch break neared, the assistant returned to distribute vouchers. She weaved through the tables, her arms filled with laminated meal cards. When she got to the last row where the man sat alone, she simply walked past, even though she had a card still in hand. The man looked down for a moment, then opened his laptop, the screen flickering slightly before steadying into a grid of code. From a distance, the lines meant nothing to the others, just green text on a black background like something out of an 80s movie. Someone muttered something about command lines being obsolete. Another intern laughed quietly and mimicked typing on an invisible typewriter. Across the room, no one asked his name. Later that afternoon, a representative from HR gave a talk about inclusion and diversity in tech. She spoke confidently, listing statistics and showing smiling photos of team outings, hackathons, and community outreach. The screen behind her showed a bar graph with the rising percentage of underrepresented groups in leadership roles. The irony didn't land with most in the room. The dark-skinned man listened with quiet eyes and a still mouth, as though he were watching a performance he had seen too many times to be impressed. When the talk ended, everyone clapped. He did too. Once. In the hallway after the session, clusters of interns walked together, exchanging LinkedIns and talking about their college startup failures with self-awareness humor. One of them noticed the man again, alone near the elevator, quietly typing on his outdated laptop. They passed by him, then doubled back to whisper something to a colleague. It wasn't loud enough to hear, but it made 3 others glance over and smile. A few feet away, the man closed the laptop gently, as if handling something sacred. He pressed the elevator button and stood waiting. No one stood with him. He raised a hand and calmly asked if there were more copies. She responded flatly that they had only printed enough for those confirmed on the project roster. He paused, nodded, and resumed scrolling on his laptop. 10 minutes later, another intern arrived late, and the coordinator pulled a fresh copy from her folder without hesitation. The older man didn't look up. The others pretended not to notice. The room returned to its usual chatter, now with a layer of complicity baked into its tone. That afternoon, the teams were scheduled to present 2-minute mock proposals based on the company's AI ethics framework. Each group had a turn at the projector, rotating quickly through ideas, some half-formed, others painfully rehearsed. When it was the older man's turn, he walked to the front with a flash drive in hand and connected it to the system. The first slide appeared for a moment, an elegant diagram of a machine learning architecture. But before he could begin, the projector flickered and went black. The tech assistant at the side muttered about the Wi-Fi crashing, then shrugged and announced a short break. The rest of the room stood and filtered out toward the coffee counter, leaving him alone at the front. He unplugged the drive without complaint, returned to his seat and resumed typing. The projector came back online 2 minutes later for the next group. No one circled back to reschedule his turn. In the shared lunch lounge, where collaboration was supposed to thrive organically, the interns formed their own circles. Some talked about university robotics clubs, others bragged about the VC scouts who had reached out to them in their senior year. The older man sat silently at a small table by the window, eating from a brown paper bag. A few glanced his way but avoided eye contact. When he rose to refill his water, someone had taken his chair. He returned, saw the change, and chose to stand rather than make a scene. The intern in his place never apologized. Later that evening, an intern asked in the team chat if someone could share notes from the ethics session. The older man replied with a neatly organized summary and supporting resources. His message was left unread. 5 other replies followed. Jokes, emojis, gifs. Not a single one acknowledged his contribution. As the week progressed, the trend intensified. He would enter rooms mid-discussion and be told that the team had already decided. He would ask for access to cloud repositories, only to be told that permissions were under review. When he requested to join the internal communication loop for engineering updates, he was given a link that led to a deactivated channel. Despite this, his daily reports were submitted precisely at 5 p.m., and each contained detailed annotations, algorithmic breakdowns, and suggestions that exceeded what the others delivered. No one responded. A senior developer glanced at one of his reports, shook his head and forwarded it to the trash without reading further. At a weekend check-in meeting, the coordinator praised the team's energy and he sat quietly at the back, not expecting to hear it. By Friday, the office buzzed with talk of the upcoming team challenge, a coding sprint judged by external tech advisors. Everyone polished their slides and polished their voices, sharing in hallways, sharing tips in Slack. When the older man submitted his name to participate, the lead intern informed him that the registration window had closed. A few others, who submitted after him, were still added manually. When he inquired again, he was told there was a mistake in the submission form. The lab remained still except for the subtle hum of servers, and when the interns filtered in, they brought with them the same hierarchies formed the week before. One of them, a confident 22-year-old with a corporate mentor already on his resume, turned toward the man just before a blank notepad and a pen, smiling as if offering something generous. The unspoken message was clear. Take notes. Document the meeting. Be useful in a passive way. The older man glanced at the notepad, then at the others. No one objected. He nodded once and began writing as the discussion commenced. As people spoke over one another in bursts of jargon and mock enthusiasm, the older man scribbled steadily, capturing points with a clarity that suggested deep comprehension. At the end of the session, the same intern who had passed him the notepad grabbed it back with a grin, flipping through the pages and muttering something about nice handwriting. No one asked why he had done it. The original author, the document was praised for its clarity and detail by a visiting executive who had no idea where it came from. The older man watched silently, his fingers hovering over his keyboard, then returned to his assigned tasks: bid log verification and data cleanup from outdated servers. The kind of grunt work no one wanted. The team assignments that week were delivered via a shared spreadsheet. The others buzzed about working on prototype UI elements, chatbot interfaces, and autonomous routing systems. When the older man checked the sheet, his cell listed a task labeled Legacy Patch Review. It was essentially manual labor, reading through deprecated code and writing down what could be deleted safely. Another intern noticed and said aloud, half-jokingly, that it was like assigning a janitor to archive the brooms. The joke earned a few chuckles. The older man said nothing. He opened the first legacy file and began working, line by line, without complaint. Every few hours, he submitted detailed breakdowns of dead logic, misplaced calls, and silent failures. No one responded. The main Slack thread continued without pause, full of banter and gifs. The silent work, though necessary, was invisible to the culture. Midweek, a junior developer, who had seen the man quietly working, asked aloud during a casual lunch break why no one had invited him to contribute to the chatbot branch. A lead intern responded that it would be too much overhead to bring him up to speed. Another added quietly that some people were better suited to support roles. No one challenged that. The developer didn't bring it up again. Later that day, the older man requested access to the model repository. The response came back 2 hours later. "We're at capacity for contributors this sprint." When another intern requested access 15 minutes later, it was granted. The system wasn't broken. It was simply tilted by assumptions no one felt obligated to question. Thursday brought the review cycle. Each intern presented a weekly summary in front of the team, and peer feedback was encouraged. The older man was called last. As he stood to present, the room grew quieter than before. Not out of respect, but a curious blend of dismissal and caution, he spoke clearly, explaining the bugs removed from archived modules, improvements made to data logging, and a missed vulnerability in a deprecated API that could have allowed unauthorized access to company servers. His explanation was technical, but concise. The coordinator smiled politely and said thank you, then moved to the next topic without inviting comments. One intern yawned audibly. Another scrolled through their phone. Presenter acted as if nothing had been said. At the end of the day, the team gathered for casual feedback and future planning. A whiteboard was set up, and each intern was asked to write one goal for the next sprint. The older man waited for his turn. When he approached the board, he wrote one sentence: "Reduce long-term risk through root-level analysis." A few of them stared, and someone whispered, "What does that even mean?" The tone shifted by the fourth week, not in volume but in texture. The snubs became more calculated, the mockery refined. One morning, while the interns were gathering before a sprint review, a folded packet of hardware specs dropped to the floor near the older man's seat. The person who dropped it stood still, watching without a word. The man bent down, picked it up, and held it up, but the intern had already turned away. Minutes later, a second file fell near his foot. This time, 2 interns waited in silence, staring at their phones until the man again returned it, unacknowledged. In the next few days, these small moments multiplied. Someone, accidentally, left a tangled charging cable beside his chair, expecting him to sort it. Others stopped speaking when he entered shared workspaces. One intern began referring to him in private as the office relic. During lunch, they made vague comments about how some people just couldn't keep up with the modern pace. The older man ate quietly, always finishing his meals away from the crowd, always returning to his work without complaint. Then came the performance ranking. The list was pinned to the Slack channel and hallway monitor, showcasing weekly metrics like participation, impact, and peer feedback. The older man's name was listed but misspelled last in faded gray. His scores were the lowest across every category. When he asked the coordinator for clarification, she said the data came from peer input and automated tracking. There was no transparency, no correction. Others simply accepted the results, using them to justify keeping him on the margins. The man said nothing. He took the rankings, copied them down, and returned to his seat. That evening he stayed late again, running batch scripts to simulate code stress on one of the older modules, one that had been quietly failing for months. The logs he exported showed security flaws no one else had noticed. He documented them, submitted a report to the system, and left it unsigned. No one knew who found the issue, and no one looked into it. The older man remained at his desk, reviewing server logs and cross-checking data anomalies that others overlooked. At one point, an intern hesitated near his desk, holding a paper flyer, but quickly slipped it back into their folder and walked away. That evening, as the group headed out, laughter filled the corridors. He stayed behind, as always, eyes fixed on his screen, his reflection faint in the monitor's glass. The following week brought a new wave of initiatives, a personal development workshop led by a visiting career coach. The invitation promised strategy sessions, mentorship planning, and access to private networking lists. Interns shared excited updates in their group chat, comparing time slots and pre-reading materials. But when the older man searched his inbox, nothing appeared. Curious, he attempted to register manually, but received an error message. User not found. Others breezed into the session, while he remained behind, assigned to a last-minute task checking deprecated file dependencies. Later, an internal memo about inclusivity efforts listed the workshop as a milestone for junior engagement. A photo attached showed the entire intern class smiling beside the career coach, arms linked except for the man, who had not even known the event occurred. The omission wasn't mentioned. No one apologized. During that same afternoon, a Slack message pinged in the main channel, celebrating the event's turnout. Several interns commented on how productive it felt to plan their futures. One joked that everyone had shown up. Well, almost everyone. The emoji responses rolled in. No one intervened. In the quieter hours of the evening, the older man ran a diagnostics batch on the company's overlooked documentation archive. He noted irregularities in back-end tagging structures, which could lead to indexing failures across the HR database. As the tour began, the guide spoke with enthusiasm, addressing interns by name, referencing their school backgrounds, cracking inside jokes from previous meetings. But when walking past the older man, he never paused, never explained the equipment nearby, as if the man were invisible or simply not part of the tour. The guide led the group into a testing room, where a new robotics prototype sat idle on a display dock. He encouraged questions, praised interns who offered theories, and gestured for volunteers to try the interface. The older man stepped forward slightly but by someone else instead. Not one person addressed it. As they moved to the next station, one intern leaned in toward another and whispered something, followed by stiff hiccupery. The older man remained near the rear of the group, observing quietly, his expression unreadable beneath the soft hum of the machines. Midway through the tour, while passing an old prototype marked for decommissioning, the guide made a passing joke about outdated tech and how companies sometimes kept things around for nostalgia. A younger intern, smirking, added that maybe they should create a beginner's class for the tech-challenged generation, then looked directly at the older man. The others chuckled, some awkwardly, some without hesitation. The guide didn't respond, simply continued his speech. The older man's face didn't shift. He noted the model tags beside the equipment, examined their patch logs, then quietly recorded something in his notepad. Later that day, back in the main workspace, the joke resurfaced. A meme appeared in the team's private Slack thread. An edited photo of a museum exhibit with the caption, "Interns of the Future." The image included the older man's silhouette standing beside an old desktop. No one acknowledged who posted it, but it stayed up for several hours without being removed. The man said nothing. He continued coding, refining a forgotten script that managed thermal loads in the server racks, shaving off processor strain by nearly 4%, an optimization no one else had caught. The next morning, the company newsletter highlighted the tour as a success. It listed several interns by name for their participation and insight. The older man's name was not mentioned. One intern replied to the thread saying they hoped the tour helped even the old dogs learn some new tricks. The message was upvoted repeatedly. Interns exchanged glances. Managers whispered. No one had expected this. As the group filtered into the main auditorium, they scanned the room for signs of visiting executives or board representatives. Instead, the older man was already seated at the long center table, alone. No one greeted him. Some assumed he had taken the wrong seat. Others chose to ignore it entirely. When the meeting began, a representative from the executive board appeared on the large screen at the front. She spoke formally, congratulating the engineering division for meeting its Q2 milestones. Then, her tone shifted. She explained that the company had undergone a quiet audit of internal systems, workflows, and interpersonal dynamics. Based on that review, a new performance structure would be introduced immediately. Everyone would now be evaluated not only on output but on professional conduct, ethical treatment of colleagues, and inclusion standards, all tracked with real-time metrics and behavioral patterning. The room stiffened. Interns glanced nervously at one another. A few tried to recall past messages and ignored reports. Whispers stopped as the representative concluded with one line. She said the updated framework and policy had been drafted, approved, and implemented by a member of the board embedded within their current team. Then she nodded toward the camera. All heads turned as she called the man's name, his full name, followed by his executive title. For the first time in 3 weeks, the room was silent with a hint of mockery. The older man stood slowly, adjusted his sleeves, and looked around. Faces paled. No one spoke. One intern blinked repeatedly, remembering the joke about tech-challenged generations. Another looked down, recalling the erased whiteboard message. Several simply stared at him, unable to connect. The man with the invisible power they had assumed was elsewhere. The representative thanked him publicly for conducting the anonymous assessment and identifying critical flaws in team cohesion. She mentioned his background as serial entrepreneur, AI pioneer, former CTO at 2 major firms. She detailed his role in the upcoming merger and how he had been tasked with evaluating talent for new leadership tracks. Nothing about his worn laptop or quiet demeanor. He remained composed, neither triumphant nor accusatory. After the call ended, he collected his notes and exited the room first. The others sat frozen, processing what had just happened. The older man, now known as the executive architect behind the change, stayed silent. He made no public statements, gave no personal commentary. Instead, automated notifications began appearing in selected inboxes, each referencing flagged entries, time-stamped comments, and neglected protocol violations. It wasn't just performance reports anymore. It was a full behavioral record, filtered through a system no one had known. One intern clicked open their flagged log and saw screenshots of Slack threads from 2 weeks ago, including the meme they had laughed at. Another found references to survey entries they hadn't realized were tied to individual patterns. The system had noted every instance of exclusion, every ignored contributions, every sarcastic aside. A quiet tension spread across the room. Screens dimmed as people reread their own history. Some began whispering, asking each other whether their names had appeared. The system, built to track patterns rather than single moments, showed long-term behavior trends: who collaborated, who avoided, who undermined. The interns began to realize the older man had been documenting everything, not with revenge in mind, but with structure and evidence. Managers weren't spared either. Some had emails quoted back at them, dismissive replies to support tickets, offhand remarks sent late at night, silence in moments that required action. One team lead opened their flagged alert and found a list of deferred decisions that directly contributed to the performance gap now under review. A few attempted to reach out to the older man, but he declined all meeting invites. His role wasn't about scolding or shaming. The system spoke for itself. It wasn't emotional, it was mathematical. Everything had been observed and calculated quietly beneath the surface. A company-wide notice arrived by late afternoon. It stated that the audit was now entering Phase 2, realignment. Teams would be restructured based on conduct assessments and contribution patterns, rather than self-reported progress or peer favoritism. Temporary roles would be reassigned, and invitations to leadership incubators would be re-evaluated. The language was careful but final. The older man's name was mentioned only once, credited with designing the behavioral AI architecture now being expanded across all departments. No praise, no drama, just acknowledgement. That evening, a new update silently integrated into everyone's desktop environment, a transparency tracker showing real-time collaboration metrics. For the first time, the system measured how people treated each other, not just what they produced. In the lab, the atmosphere remained unnervingly quiet. The same interns who once laughed openly now typed with visible restraint. A few sent private apologies via email, though no replies came. Others wiped their chat history, unaware that the system had already archived everything. No one confronted the older man directly. He continued as he always had, reviewing code, submitting suggestions, and avoiding. An automated notice landed in their inboxes, thanking them for their participation and stating that their candidacy for continued placement would not move forward. There were no follow-up calls, no feedback meetings. The decision was final. One intern stared blankly at their screen, scrolling through past interactions now reframed with uncomfortable clarity. Another packed their things quickly, avoiding eye contact as they walked out of the lab for the last time. The ripple effect moved up the chain. A mid-level manager who had remained silent throughout the process, who had deflected questions and ignored flagged behavior, received a formal reassignment notice. Her authority was suspended, and a peer review file replaced her access to leadership tools. Her past emails, dismissive, vague, and often complicit, were presented to the executive board as part of a larger case study on passive bias. She was relocated to a compliance task force in a different region. Her team was told that restructuring would continue based on trustworthiness and ethical reliability. No one protested. They had seen what silence now cost. Meetings that followed were different in tone. Where interns once talked over one another, they now listened first. Notes were shared openly, credits carefully distributed. People double-checked their replies before posting. The humor in Slack sifted few. More memes, more professional updates. Some might have called it tense, others called it overdue. The older man never acknowledged the changes directly. He continued attending briefings, submitting reports, and refining workflows. But the shadow he cast now carried weight, not from intimidation, but from the standard he had enforced, silently, precisely, without spectacle. In a private note circulated internally, the HR director wrote that the recent interventions were not punitive but corrective. The firm would offer workshops on unconscious bias, peer accountability, and restorative practice. Attendance would be tracked. Participation would matter. Those who had watched silently during earlier injustices now faced the choice to engage or be reassigned. For many, it was the first time they saw ethics not as optional ideals but measurable expectation. Several interns asked quietly whether they could access older behavior logs, not to contest but to learn. The system responded with structured summaries and reflection prompts, turning past harm into an opportunity for insight. That weekend, the lab lights remained off for once. No one stayed late. The hum of servers dimmed. The man left at his usual time, stepping into the dusk with his leather bag in hand. He didn't rush. He didn't linger. The building behind him held new rules, born not from punishment, but from presence. The kind that doesn't demand recognition to be remembered. The older man continued showing up each day, unchanged in dress or routine, but the glances toward him carried a different weight. They were no longer empty or suspicious. They were laced with recognition, respect, and in some cases regret. Among those who remained, the shift was most visible in how they listened. Meetings were quieter, not out of fear, but because words now mattered. Even silence, they had learned, left a record. One intern, once among the dismissive, made a choice no one expected. Without fanfare, they reached out to an after-school program listed in an old company flyer, one quietly funded by the older man through a foundation tied to education equity. The intern applied to be a mentor for underrepresented youth, offering to teach basic coding and career navigation. When the program director asked what changed, she asked simply, "I want to make room for someone who never had it." The application was accepted. Later, a photo surfaced in the staff update. The former manager, now reassigned, returned briefly for the annual company review. She sat in the back row of the auditorium during the end-of-year summary, no longer a speaker, only an observer. When the older man's name was mentioned for his contribution to organizational transformation, she looked down and folded her hands. After the event, she submitted a written reflection to the internal forum. In it, she recounted what she failed to see, what she had ignored, and what silence had cost her team. She didn't ask for sympathy. She asked that her mistakes be studied, not buried. The post gained traction across departments and was later used in onboarding materials. In the weeks that followed, the company's tone shifted more than its policies. Peer reviews began to include qualitative insights on leadership and humility. Senior staff offered office hours. Interns hosted cross-cultural discussions. A new poster appeared in the lab's hallway, simple, black and white, with one line across the center. "Culture isn't what we write, it's what we allow." No logo, no signature, just a mirror. Someone said it resembled something. The older man once said offhand, in a strategy session. No one confirmed it, he never brought it up. But no one removed it either. On his last day at the lab, the older man arrived at the same time as always. He submitted a final set of optimization notes, closed his laptop slowly, and left it on the desk. When he exited, no announcement was made, but everyone stood. No applause, just presence. He nodded once, then walked through the corridor as the late autumn light fell across in the end. If this story made you pause or reflect, go ahead and like the video so more people can find it. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories that challenge what we assume about others. And let us know in the comments what part of this story struck you the most, and where in the world are you watching from? We read every response.